Hello and welcome to the Yards After Catch podcast, the Yak, if you will. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Scott Mailwig at Sports 25 to Life. And we're discussing some top plays here at wide receiver. And starting off, the obvious play, I'm sure you've heard this name plenty over the past week or so. Julio Jones, highest total on the week. It's not even particularly close, especially when you take out the Thursday night game. Julio was the third most targeted wide receiver in all of football last year, averaged the second most yards per game. He's in an offense that's going to be in a shootout against a secondary that's just not very good. And, I mean, he's expensive on every site, but he's going to be popular. Atlanta's going to score points. And, I mean, you've got to get yourself a lot of exposure to Julio Jones this week.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's by far the highest upside guy, in my opinion. I mean, when he's healthy, there's really been nothing to complain about. When he and Matt Ryan are healthy together, I mean, they've been fantastic. They're playing against an Eagles team that plays super fast. It's going to force the Falcons to play really fast. I mean, there's really nothing to not like about Julio Jones. I mean, he's playing in the X position for a Kyle Shanahan offense, and I mean, we saw what that did for Pierre Garçon for the couple years he was there. I mean, they were just targeting him like crazy. I think he had 168 targets one year, and he's nowhere near the player that Julio Jones is. If Julio Jones racks up 180 targets this year and plays all 16 games, he's going to have an absolute monster year. Yeah. And this might be the best matchup he has all year. So I'm going to be playing him as much as I possibly can. They have a 26 Vegas team total. The Eagles allowed almost 2 passing touchdowns a game last year, 265 yards. I mean, I love him. He's going to be probably over-owned, if anything, but I'm going to play him a ton in cash games.
Yeah, that's not scaring me off him either. I'm definitely going to have a ton of Julio Jones. And like you mentioned, he's expensive, but I'd much rather pay up for him in cash games than any other wide receivers. So, opposing side of this exact same game, Jordan Matthews, Sam Bradford, as we saw in the preseason, looked absolutely incredible. We know he was a good quarterback when he was healthy. He hasn't really got the chance to shine with some elite talent. Jordan Matthews emerged late last season as a viable threat with some big-time upside. And, I mean, his size and strength, his ability, I mean, his body control in itself is definitely a thing to behold. So, Jordan Matthews on the other side of this one, this isn't a bad game to get yourself a lot of exposure to, especially at wide receiver.
Right, absolutely. I mean, I'm a huge Jordan Matthews fan. He's probably my favorite receiver price-wise this week. I mean, $7,200 on DraftKings, $68 on FanDuel just feels super underpriced for the number one wide receiver in an Eagles offense that's projected for 29 points right now. I mean, we saw how good he looked with Sam Bradford in the preseason. Assuming Bradford's healthy, I mean, he's a huge improvement over Mark Sanchez. Whatever your thoughts are on Sam Bradford, he's much, much better than Mark Sanchez. Yeah. And we saw Matthews produce 8 touchdowns with essentially a little Foles and a lot of Mark Sanchez last year. The Falcons were 31st in effectiveness allowed to wide receivers last year, allowed the most passing yards per game at 279. I mean, this is an absolutely elite play that's going to be really heavily owned also. Him and Julio Jones are probably going to go back and forth in this game a ton.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one to watch, and especially considering it's a Monday night game. So you pair a couple of these guys in some of your rosters, and you know your bad week turns into a good week, or your good week turns into a great week after these guys go off. So next up, your chalk play of the week, probably going to be the most highly owned player at any position, I would imagine, especially on DraftKings. That's Davante Adams. 4,400 on DraftKings, 55 on FanDuel.
Yeah.
Obviously, you all know by now, Jordy Nelson now out for the season. Randall Cobb, maybe not quite 100%, but should be close to that. But either way, this is one of the most potent passing attacks in all of football. They scored the most points per game last season. And obviously, it's a big hurt for them to lose a guy like Jordy Nelson. But Aaron Rodgers, depending on who you ask, I mean, best quarterback in football, or very, very damn near that. Yeah. So he's going to find a way to get Davante Adams involved, and he did last season, but now he's going to be a focal point of this offense. So, I mean, this is the guy you just have to play.
Yeah, I mean, the only team worse than the Falcons in wide receiver defense last year was the Bears. They have the second highest team total behind the Eagles at 28. The Bears allowed over 2 passing touchdowns a game. I mean, he's so cheap on DraftKings and more than cheap enough on FanDuel that he's going to be one of, if not the most heavily owned guys out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that defense is just absolutely pathetic. I mean, I'll play anybody in a prominent role against them this season.
Right.
Because that defense is just god-awful. All right, next up, an interesting guy that is maybe under some people's radars here. Stevie Johnson, 4,700 FanDuel, 37 DraftKings. Obviously, in a new home here, we kind of mentioned him a little bit earlier, talking about Vernon Davis. And, I mean, he's a very cheap guy. You got a 24.5-point team total here. And, this has been an offense that hasn't had a consistent threat. I mean, we saw Keenan Allen a couple of years ago was the volume guy. Really haven't seen a guy emerge as a number one option at all. So definitely a lot to go around here in this offense.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, especially with that Antonio Gates there for the first 4 games, I mean, I think Keenan Allen and Stevie Johnson are both going to rack up short range targets in this game specifically because of the way the defense sets up. I mean, I could see 13, 14 targets for Keenan Allen, 10, 11 for Stevie Johnson in this one. I mean, Malcolm Floyd's a 3-4 target guy, deep guy at most. Yeah. That's their third receiver right now. You got to think that you see a ton of Keenan and Stevie Johnson in the slot. I like both of these guys a ton just based on volume and the fact that they play with a really, really good quarterback in Phillip Rivers, who makes good throws. Both these guys run good routes. Johnson's just so much cheaper than Keenan Allen that he's the play for me, especially on DraftKings at 3,700. I mean, a 24.5 team total isn't massive, but I mean, it's still 3.5 touchdowns. I mean, the big thing for me is Gates is out, and that's Phillip Rivers' security blanket. I think he's going to have to spread that throughout both Allen and Stevie Johnson, and Johnson's just way too cheap for that to be the case.
Yeah, and it is an offense that's integrating a new rookie running back as well, so you don't imagine they're going to be relying on him too heavily right out of the gates. So next up, John Brown for the Arizona Cardinals. This one against another poor defense in the New Orleans Saints here. 26-point total for the Cardinals. Carson Palmer coming off another knee surgery, but this is the guy that could put up tons of numbers. It's a pass-first offense. And you got Michael Floyd is not 100%. Maybe he won't even play at all. We're still kind of up in the air about that. But John Brown and his price tag, we saw the kind of deep threat that he was last year. Yep. I mean, the guy has great hands. He's got speed, athleticism. This is a guy that not a lot of people are talking about, but I think they should be.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of how I feel about him in terms of GPP play versus just great play overall depends on how Michael Floyd, what his injury status is heading into week 1. He's questionable right now. For a while they were saying, almost no way he plays. Now they're saying, he might play. A lot of that's probably just like coach speak where they're trying to throw off the other team. So it's really hard to say. But even if Floyd is playing, I think Brown's a great GPP play. Like you mentioned, he's a big deep threat. Last season, it looks like he has great chemistry with Carson Palmer after the preseason. Both Keenan Lewis and Jarius Byrd are already ruled out for the Saints. That's their starting number 1 corner and free safety. I mean, it's just an absolutely fantastic matchup against a team that, even with those guys last year, was 28th in effectiveness, allowed 35 points a game to wide receivers, 250-plus yards. The Cardinals have a 26-team total in which should be a really high-scoring game. I mean, there's a ton to like here with Brown, and if Michael Floyd's out, I'm probably going to own Brown across the board a ton.
Yeah, and rightfully so, because I mean, he would just by default become probably the most targeted guy in that offense, or at least at that price tag. Definitely.
Yeah.
Next up, Charles Johnson. You made a great point on this one here, talking about how with Adrian Peterson back, he's a guy that could be overlooked. And while that is true, I mean, it makes sense that he should not be overlooked because now they actually are going to have a consistent running game that, it actually opens up the passing game for more options there because, it was a very one-dimensional offense last year, and that one dimension wasn't even very good. But adding an elite playmaker like Adrian Peterson really isn't going to take away from the production for Charles Johnson. It's just going to make things easier for him on the outside.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he looked great the last, 5 games of the year with Bridgewater starting all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, he was on the bench behind Cordarrelle Patterson, who was doing nothing for a while. Then he emerged in the second half of the season. Once Bridgewater got to take over as a full-time starter, they just went crazy together, even when they weren't throwing the ball a ton. Like you mentioned, they're going to throw it a little bit more this year. Norv Turner's in his second season running this offense. He's always been a prolific passing guy despite running the ball a lot, which is a perfect fit for a team like this that has Adrian Peterson but also has a very capable quarterback in Bridgewater with some weapons like Charles Johnson. And, I mean, it's not like Cordarrelle Patterson and some of these other guys like Jarius Wright and stuff like that can't get the job done. We've all seen them have nice games in the past. So there's some weapons on this team. So, I mean, it's a 22 Vegas team total, which isn't massive, but it's also one of those games that is going to be really interesting because it's 2 teams that you don't really know what to expect from them this year. And so it's one of those things where the week 1 total doesn't matter a ton to me because of how much has changed with both of these teams in the offseason. I mean, there's a very good chance that San Francisco could be absolutely terrible on defense this year with how many guys they've lost. And I mean, the public perception of San Francisco in general is still that they have a good defense, and I really don't know if that's going to be the case.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. I mean, we were talking the other day on the running back podcast about Adrian Peterson. I mean,
Right.
this is like you said, it's a perceived tough matchup because it's the 49ers. I mean, they've had an above-average defense for decades now. It seems like, if not an elite defense, some years. So
Yeah,
definitely
right.
missing those keys. I mean, it's a name recognition type of thing. They're going to keep people off Charles Johnson, which is great for people that notice his potential.
Yep.
So, all right, that's going to wrap things up. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out the rest of our great content for NFL, MLB, and everything else at dailyfantasycafe.com.